Okay, so we're going to hear from one of our expert friends today, Dr. Michael Rose. Dr. Michael Rose is a distinguished professor of biology at the University of California, Irvine. He has been studying the biology of aging since 1976. He has received several scientific prizes, including the inaugural Bacon Prize in 2019 from the Coalition for Radical Life Extension. After more than 300 academic articles and 10 academic books, his next book is Conceptual Breakthroughs in the Evolutionary Biology of Aging. Co-authored with Kenneth Arnold, it will be published later this year. So please help me welcome Dr. Michael Rose.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go to screen share and you're going to get to see my PowerPoint slides. That's one of the sort of deformities of academic life over the last, whoops, sorry. Let's see, I'm hoping, yeah, this should be the right one. If it isn't, I will.
Yes, we see them. Thank you, Michael.
Good. Okay, so today's talk is called Evolutionary Immortalism. In preparing for this talk, I basically realized that this is the point I've reached in my journey. And I want to give you a sense of just how long this journey has been going on. I am having, let's see, this is a dead image. And oh, there we are. So here's my agenda for today. And it's really a fundamentally immortalist talk. I came out on Facebook as an immortalist, I think a year or two ago, and that's how to be an evolutionary immortalist is the main theme of my talk, divided into these 5 components. So for those of you who never heard of me, wonder who is this guy? I started to be dragged into the vortex of the scientific foundations of aging in 1975. Although truth be told, I was resistant for almost a year before I could be persuaded to buckle down to work for my doctorate at the University of Sussex. But basically, I spent 20 years working on the science of aging, which is all about why it's so hard to live indefinitely. And then basically around 1994, I had a major transition in my academic career. And the most important thing I worked on for the next 20 years was the science of biological immortality. And I've covered that in 2 books, both with colleagues. First, Does Aging Stop? Published in 2011. And then in my book with Kenneth Arnold, actually already published. So you can rush off to Amazon and buy the book in either paperback or Kindle form. The Kindle form actually has more stuff in it than the printed paper one, including color illustrations. But for the last 10 years, I realized I've been on a different journey, which is more global than science, and that is the journey to immortalism. And today I'm going to explain the specific form of immortalism that has come to dominate my life and will now forever after. And that form is evolutionary immortalism, obviously not theistic immortalism, but also not cryogenic immortalism, which Max Moore, for example, is an advocate of. And hopefully I can persuade as many of you as possible to join me in evolutionary immortalism, as opposed to the other forms of immortalism. And for those of you not yet immortalist, perhaps I can help you become immortalists today. Thank you. About 2,400 years ago, thanks to Aristotle, Western civilization embraced a core concept of aging as a kind of cumulative mechanistic breakdown process, which can be metaphorically captured by the idea of rust, like rusting metal, rusting cars, any form of irreversible progressive deterioration. And in fact, as I will show you, this became very literal minded in the 1950s. And this was a very fateful choice for Western civilization. Now, it should be said that there are many, many theories of rust, of progressive deterioration, where aging is concerned. I'm varying a standard phraseology. Rust theories of aging are like trains. There's always another one coming, starting first with Aristotle and continuing all the way in the present day, most notoriously in the form of David Sinclair. For most of the history of Western academic biology, each person who studied aging has argued for their particular form of rust that they think is central, which I'll talk about. But you can also view all these different rusting mechanisms as complementary to each other, as in the very fashionable hallmarks of aging. And I'm going to go through some of the components in the assemblage of rust theories of aging. And the person who I think really made this extremely concrete was a biochemist called Denham Harman, who proposed a literal theory of rust that our macromolecules like DNA, RNA, and protein literally accumulate free radical damage, which is literally what happens to iron as it rusts. It's undergoing a straightforward chemical breakdown and damage process. And free radicals are particular kinds of literally rusting agents. And this idea is retained as part of the standard hallmarks of aging. And ever after this first proposal, we've had more and more rusty ideas. The next, I think, really well-formulated idea came from Leo Szilard, the true father of the atomic bomb. It was a letter that he had Einstein sign that started the Manhattan Project. And he proposed that it was specifically mutations to DNA that caused progressive, as he thought, progressive and irreversible damage of aging. And this idea, too, remains incorporated in the hallmarks of aging. And we do know that in a few cases, cancer is due to these kinds of somatic mutation. The term somatic just means to the cells of your body. What's also become very popular and weaves through a lot of rust theories is the idea by restricting the number of calories you eat, you can slow down rusting processes, be they free radical damage, somatic mutation, or some of the others I'm going to list. And the first organism where this was, I think, pretty well established was the lab mouse in the 1930s. And now we know that restricting your diet can produce small to large increases in your total lifespan with varying degrees of misery. For many of us, myself included, I regard dietary restriction at the level of total calories and nutrients as not something that extends your health span, but something that can increase your longevity to a limited extent. This fourth idea, which is I'll call RNA air catastrophe, put forward by Leslie Orgel in the 1960s, is a really cool, complicated idea, which is one of the best refuted or falsified or demolished Rust theories. We now have a vast amount of evidence that it almost never happens. So don't talk about that anymore. It's no longer talked about commonly. In the 1990s, Cynthia Kenyon presented very convincing data for nematodes, really selling a series of discoveries that actually started in the 1970s with people like Michael Klass, and then in the 1980s, Tom Johnson, a friend of mine. Cynthia Kenyon brought the fact that you could take mutations in a very specific special set of pathways in nematodes and greatly increase nematode lifespan. And many of those genes also occur in other life forms. But the excitement of that surfacing in the aging community in the 1990s, particularly in Cynthia's hands, has really died down, because in no other organism have we found such dramatic single mutant genes. Starting in the last 20 years, the focus has turned to the comparative genomics, where you look at all the genes at once, of animals like naked mole rats, which, contrary to the name, aren't actually rats. They're really cute if you don't like body hair. They're even more hairless than humans, another very hairless species. And compared to similar sized mammals, they live on the order of 10 times longer. And this is one of the big concerns of Calico now, is to try to figure out, well, how the hell did they do that genome-wide? They still don't have an answer. Now, turning to the present day, in the 2000s or the noughties, David Sinclair published a very influential paper in Nature, arguing that resveratrol was, in fact, the key to modifying the most important genes, he has long argued, which are the sirtuins, an idea he got from his doctoral advisor, Lenny Garante. Unfortunately for that idea, which I'll talk more about in a minute, we now have more than 15 years of devastating evidence against the assertion that sirtuins and resveratrol are the key to aging, which I'll review in more detail. David Sinclair, being a very adroit, rusty guy, has moved on to niacin, the vitamin, which you can get in a variety of forms, from niacin to NMN, and he now promotes that as the key to living forever. Let me review the characteristic moves, maneuvers, and sleights of hand that are in common to all rusty theories and the scientists who propose them, which I'm going to collectively refer to as rusties. So your first step, given that you agree with the overwhelming scientific consensus that aging is an inevitable rusting process, which you can only reverse with great difficulty, especially by buying the products promoted by the rusty. You first start with some kind of plausible story. So Aristotle, for example, proposed that aging involved the loss of internal vital heat and the drying out of the body, so that you go from hot and moist when you're young to cold and dry, like a university professor, as you get older. That was the original Rust story, but there are many, many variations on this initial move where you invent a plausible story. based on the biology of the day, and biology changes every 100 years roughly. Then you look for circumstantial evidence for your particular model of rust. So if you think that something important to health falls with age, you say that that particular thing is subject to some inevitable form of rusty biochemical deterioration. Or if you think that you have a really specific characterization of the form of rust you care about. For example, Denham Harmon and his followers would say protein carbonylation is the thing that increases with age. And that's an example of free radical damage to your proteins. Just as an aside, that has been studied many, many times in much longer lived fruit flies that myself and others have created. And in fact, we know definitively that those types of rust don't affect our fruit flies. And in fact, fruit flies that live far longer accumulate that particular type of rust faster than normally living fruit flies. So much for that idea. Now, the third step is to make an experiment work to illustrate your particular rusty idea. And one of the best organisms to do this in is inbred lab mice, because these are sick, pathetic animals, which are really prone to dying. And especially if you give them really bad diets. Now, let me give you an example of how David Sinclair did this in the noughties. And this is now what I'm about to say widely accepted. And I just heard another example of this story on the internet in the last 48 hours on YouTube. Peter Attia said it. And that is that David Sinclair fed his sick inbred lab mice a diet that contained huge quantities of coconut oil, which totally inflamed their livers and caused their livers to compress both their lungs and their hearts. And they died nasty and horrible deaths, unless they were given gigantic doses of resveratrol, and then they lived longer. And it's a not trivial fact of laboratory research on mice that nobody has ever been able to do that again since David Sinclair did that in the noughties. But we'll continue with David Sinclair's story. This, of course, motivated him to claim in books like Lifespan that he was on the trail of completely general rust mechanisms for aging. And then in the late noughties, he managed to sell a company that he started off of his resveratrol story, a company called Sertris, to GlaxoSmithKline for more than $700 million. GlaxoSmithKline also tried to replicate David Sinclair's results, never succeeded. And within a few years, they closed down Sertris as part of their research plan. But don't feel sorry for David Sinclair. He got his millions of dollars and he went on to another story, another rusty story. And he got the next rusty train out of Dodge, and he's selling NMN to people. Now, all of those ideas and all of those people stand in complete contrast to evolutionary immortalism, an idea which had its first germs in the late 19th century when August Weismann, a then famous evolutionary biologist, pointed out that germ lines are immortal. They don't undergo aging. And from this, he derived a very profound conclusion that any time that evolution by natural selection wants to produce immortality, it can, to which I think the basic research of the 20th century showed evolution by natural selection loves immortality. It loves it so much, it's even produced multicellular animals and plants that are biologically immortal. What does that mean? It means if you keep them in a lab in good conditions, they'll live forever. The pinkish, flowery looking thing I started my talk with was an immortal sea anemone. Give them great lab conditions, they can live forever. The thing I started my rusty slides with was a trembling aspen tree. In nature, trembling aspen do not age at all. They will happily live thousands of years, no problem, and stay healthy so long as they don't catch an infection or get burned down in a forest fire. In the 1990s, we discovered that our aging comes to a stop, and in fact, the cessation of aging we now know is very normal. Far from aging being an inevitable feature of life, it is a very special feature of life, which only happens over a distinct phase, and that phase can be readily manipulated. And when you stop aging, it's not like you continue deteriorating but continue to live. In fact, you stop deteriorating. Exactly the opposite of what all rusty theories presume. And the science behind these four assertions and the fifth, the fact that when aging stops depends on your diet and lifestyle, are in our latest book, uh, Conceptual Breakthroughs in the Evolutionary Biology of Aging. If you want to see math, if you want to see data, they're all there. In the past, I used to be so naive that I would go around inflicting people with the math and the data whenever given the chance, but now I know better. But all of that stuff is published and readily available. What does it mean to be an evolutionary immortalist? What steps can you take to become an evolutionary immortalist and have the prospect of immortality? Well, firstly, you have to accept that this is actually the best science that frames the problem of aging. Aging is a problem nested within the ideas of evolutionary biology, and evolutionary biology is the foundation of true, scientifically valid immortalism. If you really want to be an immortalist and you care about science, then you want to be an evolutionary immortalism, because that's the only scientifically established flavor of immortalism. Once you have accepted that science, you can live an evolutionary immortalist lifestyle in terms of your diet, your exercise, and choosing a tribe, ideally a tribe of fellow immortalists. And the people I know who go the farthest in that direction are people within People Unlimited. And Sarah is my type specimen for complete 100% commitment to evolutionary immortalism. She does not compromise in any way. If you're there, Sarah, stand up, wave. There she is, waving to you. All you have to do is exactly what Sarah does, and you'll be fine. Now, once you embrace an evolutionary immortalist lifestyle and you're at the appropriate age for your evolutionary history, which Sarah is, and it's even younger than Sarah for some people, your aging will stop. Okay? Aging will be over for you. The only questions now is, well, how do you best live as an evolutionary immortalist? And that's really the rest of my talk. The most important thing is to immunize yourself from the rusties. You have to realize that if you buy products from David Sinclair, you're not helping and you may be hurting. And David Sinclair is just today's type specimen of the hundreds of people who want to sell you supplements that are either worthless or toxic. Unfortunately, almost all physicians believe in rusty theories of aging, and they have lots of medications to give you. And not all of those medications, but many of those medications are also toxic. It's tragic. And in fairness to them, they have a complete scientific rationale that they believe in. Because they're physicians, they're never exposed to evolutionary biology except on a handful of campuses in the United States. It's more common in Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, where evolutionary biology is not hated the way it is so commonly in the United States. So That is the biggest problem we all face, is Rusties and the people they influence really wanting to do what I regard as deadly things to us. More on that later. Assuming they didn't kill you, then if you've stopped aging, if you've lived a Sarah People Unlimited lifestyle, your most important move is to wait for the 21st century medications that will be less toxic, in no small part because those medications will not be based on rusty ideas. So really, the key issue that we all face, because I'm now a practicing evolutionary immortalist, is surviving in a world dominated by deathism, and the rusties that buy into deathism, even if they think, and in all sincerity, because I'm not accusing them of insincerity, I'm not accusing them of mere greed, I'm accusing them of scientifically incorrect, highly motivated, whatever you want to call what they do. So this is really the note I want to end on, is this contrast between rustyism, deathism, and evolutionary immortalism. At the core of rusty deathism is that basically, for the time being, they expect you to die horribly. And in their opinion, your only salvation is in buying their products and funding their research, which tragically I think is entirely erroneous in its foundations and only accidentally correct. And we've been publishing scientific papers to that effect over the last 10 years. So instead of embracing rusty deathism, in my opinion, the core belief of a true evolutionary immortalist is to think in terms of your health continuing indefinitely once you have stopped aging. Now, saying indefinitely does not mean that today I can guarantee that you will live to be 1,000 years old. That's not what indefinitely means. Indefinitely means that you get lucky, you don't get run over by a truck, you don't get a really deadly infection like Ebola, you don't die of cancer that's not properly treated. But if you're lucky enough and you've stopped aging, you have no guaranteed sell-by date. You have no guaranteed expiration. If you stay away from trouble, you can live indefinitely. If you're lucky enough, at least right now, because things are about to change. They will only change for you if you avoid products based on rusty thinking. Rusty thinking will almost always, I will not say always, but almost always get in the way of being an evolutionary immortalist and therefore biologically immortal in the sense that I've studied as a scientist for the last 30 years. And here's the beautiful thing. Because now we have amazingly powerful technologies which are just now giving birth to a 21st century medicine, a medicine based on the full power of genomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, machine learning, also known as AI. And by that, I don't mean ChatGPT. I mean very special biomedical machine learning. And those technologies, properly applied, not applied in a rusty deathist way, but applied in an immortalist way, will make living on the immortality plateau, will make living when you're no longer aging better and better every few years for the rest of this century, which is why those of you who have stopped aging will soon, I can't say exactly when soon will be, will start to become functionally younger and younger and younger all through the rest of this century, less and less subject to things from COVID to cancer. All those problems will recede for you once you stop aging in an evolutionary immortalist way, and we get better and better medicine from the standpoint of diagnosis, therapeutics, and everything else. And that is the future I would like you all to embrace. I know for some of you that will be hard. And now I want to say to all of you, thank you, because in particular, the People Unlimited community have helped me transition from just being a scientist who studied biological immortality from 1994 to 2014 to somebody who is an immortalist, not just scientifically, but foundationally. Thank you.
Woo! Thank you, Michael. I'll get out of the way. Thank you for that very, this way. Thank you for that very thorough insights. I was just sitting there and I feel like you've taken us through like a series of evolutionary biology kind of master class. And this feels, I don't want to say the culminating episode, but it feels like realizing everything that you've been speaking has until now. But do you, right here?
Thanks, Michael. That was weirdly entertaining as well.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. And but I'm curious about the term that you're endorsing here, or coining and endorsing, which is evolutionary immortalism. How are you finding that term being received?
Well, since this is the first time I publicly used it, you tell me. How do people feel? Do you like it?
I like it, but I know some. Yeah. You know, when people think something's too much for them, they don't want to admit it. They say, but I know some people that would be troubled by it. No, I'm just curious. Evolutionary immortalism. I don't think those two concepts have been put together. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
It just came to me while I was preparing this talk a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Michael, I have a question about how do you find, like, how are you finding people when, react to you, when you bring this up?
Well, I mean, I stumbled into this. I mean, in 2014, I don't think I was an immortalist at all. I don't think I had fully embraced what I was experiencing myself as I started to alter my trajectory in health in an immortalist way. And in all honesty, if it hadn't been for People Unlimited and first going to my first Rad Fest in, I think it was 2017, I really don't know that I would be here today. And then every time I have interacted, of course, most especially by coming to Scottsdale and being literally in your, what can we call it, chapel, temple, um, tribal embrace. Every time I moved another notch. And it was only like a year or two ago that on my Facebook, you know, profile, I called myself an evolutionist, a progger, uh, my biggest vice, and an immortalist. So I came out of the closet as being an immortalist on Facebook. What better place to do it? And
The official place to come out of the closet, I hear.
yeah, so I mean, I came out of the closet on being a progger, I think 5 or 6 years ago on Facebook, though it was like pretty obvious people looked at my profile. Of course, I was always on Facebook as an evolutionist. Um, but yeah, uh, as many of you will appreciate, it's hard to be an immortalist, right? Especially in a prevailing deathist culture. Um, and I mean, literally, when I was using the term biological immortality in talks in the early noughties, my colleagues would be totally offended and insist that I not use the term biological immortality. And I would point out to them, look, this is a concept that's been around for a long time, but they really take offense to it. Like, I just reviewed a book for Quarterly Review of Biology, and what's now become de rigueur among the rusty deathists is every time they publish a book or a long review article, they feel it's incumbent upon them to humiliate people who use the word immortality. And, you know, 20 years ago, around 2004, I would say, okay, you don't like the term immortality, I'll call it something else. The cessation of aging or aging stopping. The truth is, they didn't really like that better. So screw them. So now I'm an out of the closet immortalist, and I will fly my immortalist banner high. I've been working on biological immortality as my, predominant central scientific focus for 30 years. I think immortality is the foundation of radically intervening in our health spans and lifespans. If you still believe in rusty deathism, you're an impediment to our progress toward indefinite lifespans. It's
So, so another question I have, I'm just curious in your experience on Facebook and I guess other places, does like stacking up all this information and making all this, making this argument, like you make a very, I mean, for people who are following, you make a very crisp, fact-based argument. Do you find that people then does that make people shift to becoming immortalists?
um, with my colleagues who start out with rusty deathism, because that's where everybody starts, right? That's where I was 49 years ago, when I started on this long journey. Right now, all I'm trying to do with my scientific colleagues is help get them where I was 30 years ago as a scientist, which is taking biological immortality and the cessation of aging seriously. And that's what our latest book does. It makes the scientific case. And and it's a little sneaky. Unlike the book Does Aging Stop, published in 2011, when we had less evidence than we have now, does aging stop, like, directly asks the question, okay? Our latest book is more insidious. It sort of starts off with like math and then experiments that are widely accepted. All the work I did in the first 20 years of my career is now generically accepted. It's in standard aging books. They allude to it directly or indirectly. They talk about how I made flies live longer in the 1970s. They often get the date wrong. They think I did it in the 1990s. Interesting slip. So everything I was doing up until my publication in 1996 with Larry Muller, which was all about, the evolution of biological immortality, like, how the hell is it possible for our aging to stop and for us not to zoom off toward death by an irreversible process of rust? That was a really hard question that Larry Muller and I wrestled with from 1994 to 1996. And then we published our results in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is one of the top 5 journals in the world. And it's commonly cited, but it's not that commonly understood. That scientifically, that it's like, Einstein's 1905 paper about Newtonian physics. If you accept E equals mc squared, then you're really no longer a Newtonian. If you accept the math that Larry Muller and I published in 1996, then you can't really continue to accept rusty deathism. And then, in addition to the math, from 96 to 2014, we published a long series of experimental papers showing that rusty deathism had to be wrong. And we published our book, Does Aging Stop?, which basically says rusty deathism is wrong. And nobody in the ensuing 10 years, since we basically came to the end of that series of publications, has ever published a paper showing that we were wrong about the 20 years of work. Okay? Paper after paper after paper. Meanwhile, every few years, another rusty deathist theory bites the dust. Somebody comes up with really devastating evidence against it. And then they say, well, then there's this other rusty deathist idea. Like, if you don't accept free radical damage, well, maybe you'll accept the Hayflick limit, for those of you who know about the Hayflick limit. And then it's shown, well, in fact, lots of cells get past the Hayflick limit. And then they go, well, maybe it's not the Hayflick limit. Maybe it's this other thing. So we've got this thing called, it was first Aubrey de Grey's 7 Deadly Sins of SENS. And then that was recycled into the 10 hallmarks of aging. And that's now expanding to 11 hallmarks of aging. And some people think there are 14 hallmarks of aging. And they're all a bunch of sort of rusty deathists, stones in a swamp. And you jump from one to one. And if you slip and fall off one of these rusty deathist theories because it turns out to be wrong, you swim over to the next rusty deathist theory and say, well, if resveratrol doesn't work, try buying NMM from, this supplier, and that'll be the key to your aging, and on and on and on. It's like, you remember the game with the 1 pea and 3 walnuts? It's like 1 pea, and right now we have 11 walnuts. And they keep moving the pea around amongst the 11 walnuts. It's why astrology survived so long. Okay? Because astrology has lots and lots of complicated ideas in it, especially full-blown astrology. So you can always explain anything using astrology. And you can always explain one experiment or another, except for the experiments from the lab that Larry Muller and I have run over the last 30 years. You can always explain away this or that failure of rusty deathism by moving the pea to another walnut faster than the eye can see. It's a trick. It's the biggest and most deadly parlor game in the world. Because of this parlor game, hundreds and millions of people are suffering and dying, when instead the billions of dollars that are spent on rusty deathism could be spent on evolutionary immortalism. And if I had 1% of that money, those of you who stopped aging would be becoming younger and younger and younger every few years.
Yeah, wow, wow. Well, thank you so much, Michael. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to contribute to your evolutionary immortalism, People Unlimited, right? Yeah. So
I think the combination,
and that, and you're a gift, and we really appreciate who you are. My comment or question is that I assume you're not saying, but maybe you are, okay, that every supplement, for example, just using supplements, is a rusty, deathism, supplement. because as you also
No,
said, we're moving, okay, yeah,
no.
because we're moving, yeah. So I didn't think you were, but I want to be clear because that could be a little bit confusing. So, because we're moving into, you said also in this 21st century here, where we're going to be having, supplements or drugs or whatever that are going to complement us, and which I assume there's some now, because
Yes.
I know of some, I use some, I've tested them, et cetera. But to your point, so maybe could you clarify that maybe a little bit, because as a and by the way, we're also grateful to have you a member of our People Unlimited tribe here, as you put it. We're really happy you're a member, and I also really commend you for speaking out like you are like this about immortality. I mean, it's so true. We've had these discussions a lot this week. We had some people here talking about it too, that there's not enough bold movements in the I'm so bored myself with longevity, and the concept of it. I mean, we have to claim what we really want from our heart. So anyway, could you clarify that though a little bit, what you're saying about the supplements? I mean, I got that immediately when I said that you're not saying every supplement, you're just saying, yeah. So would you clarify that a little bit, please?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Jim. The best supplements you can take are vitamins, as recognized by the AMA and so on. However, some vitamins you can overdose on and they can be toxic. Vitamins A, E, and C are the best characterized in terms of toxicity. Even some of the least toxic vitamins like vitamin D3, it is possible if you go completely nuts to get to high enough levels of vitamin D3 in your body that they become toxic. I think without question, there is practically no substance whatsoever that you can ingest which doesn't become toxic at high enough doses.
Yeah, and
So,
if I might insert here for a moment, and that in actuality, that's also true with food, though, too, right? You can overeat food.
yep,
Yeah, you can
absolutely.
overeat certain foods and be toxic to your body. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons why dietary restriction works so well in lab rodents is because your typical lab rodent is bored out of its mind and its main source of pleasure is eating, which is why characteristically lab rodents become obese
Mm.
as they eat more and more. So a significant part, and I won't say all, but a significant part of the benefits of caloric restriction involve avoiding obesity. But there's another part too, which is that certainly human GI tracts have not evolved to eat large quantities of food 24/7.
No, that's right.
The hyper obese are literally eating themselves to death. And that's why things like intermittent fasting, especially for the obese, can be so beneficial. At the foundation of any intervention that is going to work is evolutionary immortalism, both as the general scientific framework and even specific technological ideas, like the dietary and lifestyle changes I've been recommending to you guys in person over the last 5 years.
Okay,
As
so
we learn,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
just gonna jump in there for a moment. So, as far as if we're going to do a supplement as such, I mean, there's certain basic ones we know we need overall, but then we want to do supplements or as pharmaceuticals come out that complement evolutionary biology, we want to do those that actually complement the evolution of being biologically immortal. Correct?
And I've been working on strategies for doing that for years.
Mm.
And I'm retiring this year as a scientist, and I mean a university scientist. I'm going to take that hat off, and starting this summer, I'm going to start a company which will be dedicated to the correct curation of all the pharmaceuticals and supplements which go with indefinite lifespans,
Oh,
the
fantastic.
cessation of
Yeah,
aging.
great, great, great. Awesome. Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Wow, you always give us a powerhouse of information and very passionately. So yeah,
Thank you.
I'm sorry you didn't make it in person. We always love seeing you here in person. So we can give you our big People Unlimited hugs.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You mean so much to me, all of you.
yeah, thank you. You mean so much to us, Michael. Yeah,
Thank you.
bye-bye.